Buddy. Right. Let's do it the official way. Who's this fella? Good evening, everyone, once again, and welcome to this evening. We're calling it the Bajan Hub for several reasons. This event is organized by the National Council of Barbadian Association, and it's giving us an opportunity to let others know what the Barbadian community is about and what we're doing right here. And I will not waste time giving any more preamble, but to say, I'd like to introduce a lady who's synonymous with excellence and professionalism, Miss Marilyn Devonish. Good evening, Marilyn.
Oh, good evening, and thank you.
Applause, please.
And welcome everyone to what I'm sure will be a very interesting debate for today, looking at this report. So the way that it will run today is we will hear from all of our wonderful presenters first. They will each have 7 minutes plus an extra 30 seconds leeway if we need it, in terms of to present their thoughts about the report. And then we will go to Q&A. In terms of Q&A, you can type your questions into the chat. However, if you would like to voice your question, then the request is that you are okay to be on camera. So if you don't want to be on camera, you can put your questions into the chat, and I'll be cycling through and pulling those from there. We'll also start with an introduction for all of our speakers as well, so that you know everyone who is on the panel. And Tyrone, do you want to go in the order that you had in the email in terms of Esther, Jocelyn, Angela, Yvonne, Adrian, and Richard?
I think it'd be easier for you and easier for them. I think some of them are already prepped for that.
Okay, great. So that is the order that we will do the Q&A. We might have a short break before we go to the question and answer segment. That will be, a couple of minutes if you need to just refresh, run to the bathroom, get some water, etc. So what I will do now is I will introduce you to each of our speakers, and they all have the most wonderful, impressive, amazing bios. So I may preface some of those things just so we can get down to the business at hand. So the first person that you'll be hearing from is Esther Stanford. And is it Xosei in terms of, I hope I pronounced your surname correctly. And Esther is a jurisconsult, repatriationist, and historian of the international social movement for Afrikaans reparations. As a new abolitionist, Esther serves as the co-vice chair of the Pan-Afrikaans Reparations Coalition in Europe. She is also the co-initiator of Stop the Mangazami, and that stands for We Change Genocide and Ecocide. It's a campaign that has been championing the UK government call to establish an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry for truth and reparatory justice. In this regard, she works with the Green Party of England and Wales to get cross-party race, repatriations and atonements for motions passed by local and city councils to support such a participatory democratic reparations process. Esther is also the official spokesperson for the Afrikaans Day Reparations March Committee and the co-facilitator of the international networks of scholars and activists Afrikaans reparations. So Esther, did you just want to unmute for a microphone and say hello so people can see who you are if they haven't met you before?
Hi, greetings everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Esther Stanford-Xosei, that's how you pronounce that bit of it.
Thank you.
And it's African, not Afrikaans, who are European, who basically colonized South Africa and have dispossessed African people of their rightful inheritance. So I'd like to make some introductory comments, if I may. Thank you.
And Esther, I'll do a quick introduction for everyone. I just wanted people to be able to see who you are, and then we're going to come back and we'll get you started.
No worries. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I should have been clearer. That's on me. I just wanted people to see who you are. The next on our panel is Jocelyn Daniel. Jocelyn was born and raised in England. She went to a secondary all-girls school before completing a BSc in combined health studies and postgraduate in health studies at university. Her teaching career spans over 20 years. She started her career as a teacher in secondary school and age provision before moving on to higher education. She continues to work in post-secondary education. Jocelyn is also a trustee for Children and Young People's Disability Charity, and she got involved with this to support the needs of many individuals that often become excluded from systems within society. She is happily married to Wayne and is the proud mother of 2 sons who have experienced challenges within the education system. Having experienced firsthand systemic racism, she is very passionate about promoting a fairer and inclusive system for everyone. And she is also a college lecturer for health and social care. So Jocelyn, did you want to just pop in and say hello so we can see where you are located?
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all.
Fantastic, wonderful to have you here. The next person you'll be hearing from is Angela Ishmael. So Angela is a senior executive with over 25 years experience directing, designing and delivering consultancy interventions for a range of private, public and third sector organizations. As a leader in diversity, inclusion, equality and dignity at work, Angela understands the challenges of progressing and promoting inclusion at senior management and board levels. She also coaches and supports key stakeholders, executives, enabling them to embrace difference in themselves and others. She was also a chief executive at Ackroyd Children and Families, formerly head of diversity and dignity at the Work at Work Foundation, and has worked in organisations such as the London Stock Exchange and London Business School. And if we could just ask you all to mute your microphones, that would be wonderful. And I can see Winston.
You have muted your microphone.
Hold on. Oh, sorry, it muted everyone. Sorry, thank you for that, Richard. So Angela has produced publications on dignity and diversity leadership, which includes a revised edition of her popular book, Harassment, Bullying and Violence at Work, a practical guide to combating employee abuse. She's also part of a team that produced the award-winning films No Excuse, Beat Bullying at Work and Get the Balance Right, and is a member of the editorial board for the IRS publication Managing Diversity in the Workplace. There is a lot more that we could say about Angela, but for now, because I'm sure some of that will become clear as we go through. Angela, would you like to unmute so we can just see where you are located?
Hi there. Hello. Thank you, Marilyn.
Wonderful. Fantastic to see you here. Can't wait to hear more from you. Next, we have Yvonne Ward. So
she's
Yvonne,
not here yet.
She's not here yet. That's fine. We'll still do her introduction, and I'm sure she will be joining us.
I am here, guys. There's something wrong. I keep jumping in and out, so I am here and I can hear you.
Oh, wonderful. So Yvonne is a lecturer on psychology and sociology and head of adult learning, and is also a postgraduate tutor in psychosocial studies, focusing on research and family therapy. Her crucial question regarding the race report is the validity of the research and the generalized conclusion we all attest to as inaccurate. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Next, we have Adrian Rollins. Adrian is a former county cricketer and now works as deputy head of a school in Nottingham. He says, I have a wealth of experience that makes me who I am. He is incredibly passionate about young people fulfilling their potential and creating progression that fills them with genuine pride. He has worked in the professional sports industry for 10 years and has worked in education for more than 15 years and has numerous charitable projects that serve the local and broader community. Adrian is also a single father, raising 3 children, of which 2 are now adults, and he is the son of Martha Rollins, OBE, who was the first Black head teacher in 2 London boroughs, firstly Newham and then in Elmfield. So Adrian, could you please unmute your microphone just so we can see where you are located in our virtual room?
Yeah, hi, I'm here. Good evening.
Wonderful, lovely to see you. And our final introduction, this is just going to be a very short one-liner. This is the introduction that he would like for today because he is a man with some very impressive credentials indeed. We have Richard Drayton, who is a professor of imperial history at King's College. So Richard, please unmute your microphone so we can see where you are located.
Good evening.
Good
Thank you very much, Tyrone, for organizing this event.
Wonderful, always a pleasure to see you. So the running order for today, now all of our speakers, before we begin, I'm just going to be asking you very simply if you'll be managing your own time, or if you wanted me just to pop in when you say have about 2 minutes left, because what I don't want to do is interrupt the flow of what you're speaking about, but nor do I want you to think that you're halfway through and we get to the end of our time. So that's always the slight dilemma, but you have 7 minutes, maximum 7.5. We will hear from all of our speakers, and then after that, we'll start taking questions. For those of you I have never met before, if needs be, we do have the bell. I hope I won't need to use the bell, but it's just to let you know that we're absolutely out of time. So Esther, you are the first person that we are hearing from. So are you okay to manage your time, or did you want me just to pop in and say, like, let you know when you've got 2 minutes left?
That would be helpful, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, I will now hand over to you. Please take it away.
Okay, greetings everyone. I'm going to begin with some introductory comments because I know that the brilliant panelists that we have following me will fill many of the bases. So I want to begin with this notion of institutional racism, which is one of the main findings of this report from the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities, that Britain is no longer institutionally racist. Now, that's a very absurd finding, to say the least. Not least because racism itself is a global phenomenon. You don't just tackle racism, in one country and it's eliminated and it exists everywhere else in the world. And that concept of institutional racism, which was first defined by Stokely Carmichael and Charles V. Hamilton in the USA in 1967, was also defined in 1999, as we know, by the Stephen Lawrence inquiry led by Sir William Macpherson. And the Stephen Lawrence inquiry defines institutional racism, in case we've forgotten, as the collective failure of an organization to provide an appropriate and professional service to people because of their color, culture, or ethnic origin. It can be seen or detected in processes, attitudes, and behaviors which amount to discrimination through unwitting prejudice, ignorance, thoughtlessness, and racist stereotyping, which disadvantage minority ethnic people. Now, prior to the findings of this report, in November of last year, the Joint Committee on Human Rights, which is appointed by the House of Lords and the House of Commons, considered matters relating to the human rights of so-called Black people in the United Kingdom. And they produced their 11th session report, arising from evidence that they had gathered in between 2019 and 2021 on the human rights of Black people, racism. And the report found that racial inequalities in the protection of human rights raised by Black Lives Matter movement led the Joint Committee on Human Rights to commission polling, which found that over 3/4 of Black people of African, and African Caribbean heritage, people self-defining as Black, British, etc., do not believe that their human rights are equally protected compared to the white majority in the UK.
Esther, your time is by no means up. Just one quick request. Your sound changed about a minute or so after you started speaking. I don't know why that is.
I'm not sure either, because I'm not, can you hear me okay now?
It's not as clear.
Because I'm right before a PC with my mic open, so I'm not sure why you're not hearing. So shall I continue?
What I will say to everyone is maybe just turn your volume up a little bit, rather than we'll have to go around the house. But I just want to let you know, just in case anything had changed on your end. But sorry, back to you.
Okay, hopefully you'll be able to hear me. Anyhow, the main findings of this review on human rights of Black people, as the report was described, is that there have been numerous inquiries and reports into racial discrimination and racism as experienced by Black people, other racially marginalized communities, and the overarching theme is lack of implementation of the 200 plus recommendations of these previous reports. Then comes along the Black and brown-faced, fronted whitewash of a report from the Prime Minister's Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities that we saw published on the 31st of March. And overall, it says that pretty much the UK is top of the class when it comes to white majority countries in the UK in regards to its track record on race relations and tackling racism and racial discrimination. Now, with its measly and mediocre 24 recommendations, none of which actually deal with the significant discrimination and racism faced by so-called Black, Asian, and other racially marginalized communities in the UK. But this should not be a surprise to any of us. A commission set up by Munira Mirza, who is a Boris Johnson ally, and also who has gone on public record as being skeptical of the existence of institutional racism in the UK, as well as having a chair who has also in the past openly questioned the existence of institutional and structural racism in the personage of Tony Sewell, then we should not be surprised that the Commission delivered these results. And not accepting the root causes of racism and racial discrimination will always lead to a wrong analysis and the wrong solutions, which I am suggesting are included in this report.
And just to let you know, you've got 2 minutes left.
Sure. Rightly so, there has been widespread condemnation of this report across the country from many different sections of this society. Civil society, academics, business leaders, community leaders, etc., etc. This report ignores decades not only of lived experiences of our communities and those who face racism of all kinds, but also it ignores decades of academic research that have actually led to alternative findings, not to mention the consensus that was reached in Durban in 2001, the World Conference Against Racism, that you cannot tackle racism against specific groups of people unless you recognize the history of that racism. And for Black people of African and African Caribbean heritage, enslavement and colonialism are key. So what we have in this report is a case of policy-led evidence replacing evidence-led policy. And my concluding point here is that the report comes to some very wrong conclusions, which actually deny the struggles and the resistance, although it tries to recognize the resilience of our communities who have faced racism. But one of the limitations and problems of this report coming out of this commission is that it didn't come from the people themselves. It came from a cherry-picked, selected group of people who were going to produce the kind of results that this government wants to portray to the world at a time when there is widespread movements to seek redress and accountability for the impact of historical injustice on living populations today, especially by way of what is known as repair or reparations, reparatory justice, which is about repairing the harm. So there is an alternative, which is a way forward that is led by communities, where communities themselves can have their say and actually not only speak to the harm and the wrongdoing that we have experienced in terms of being victims of racism, but also the repair that ordinary people and our communities are affecting for ourselves, by ourselves, which require support from others, including those at the government level. And it's that solution that I and other campaigners working on reparatory justice are pushing for, not a government stitch-up, which is about Britain congratulating itself to try and thwart the international attention that is now coming on this country to repair, to be part of repair and atonement.
And just to say, I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to wind up. Please make your closing remarks, but you've got about 30 seconds to wind up.
Okay, I finished.
Wonderful, thank you so much. And I'm going to send you a quick private message as well, just in terms of the microphone, because we definitely want to hear you as clearly as we possibly can. But that was amazing. Thank you so much for that first contribution. And we will be coming back to you when we come to the Q&A, because I know you have a lot more to share. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Our next speaker is Jocelyn Daniel. And just for those of you in the UK, we've been calling this the Sewell report. So if any of you see that coming up in the comments, etc., we're calling it that here in the UK because Dr. Tony Sewell, CBE, was the main person who is the kind of figurehead for this. But it's the same report, just in case anyone who's not in the UK might be confused about why you might see us calling it different things. So Jocelyn Daniel, please make your way to our virtual stage. We would love to hear your thoughts on this report.
Wow, well, good evening, everyone. Well, I think Esther's really set a good platform for us all, and there's not much more to say apart from I looked more particular from the education stance of the report. So that was looking at pages from 55 to 82. I did read all of it, but then went back into homing more to the education side. And from the start, the whole report didn't even pose the right question. It should have more looked at what changes were needed to make a fairer country, as Esther talked about all the other different reports we've had in the place before. The report itself doesn't touch upon the high impact of COVID on the Black and Asian community. It didn't look about what the teachers' campaign have done for years about a fairer national curriculum. None of that was in place. It didn't give any answers to why there are a lack of racial diversity at the top of the career ladder. So statistics shows that, I think someone's camera went off. I've lost my train of thought, sorry. That there's fewer than 1% of the UK university professors are Black, and there are 46% of schools within the UK that still do not have any Black or Asian minority teachers, even though they're in a high community of Black and Asian students. So when it's talking about they needed someone to aspire to, and people from the Black community needed to aspire to, that doesn't exist for a lot of people, for a lot of these children and young people. The other factors that were coming from this report were, it's pretty much damning, to be honest. Although the report's trying to say there's no institutional racism, within their own language and the terms that they were using, the terminology, it was written within itself. The way it categorized the ethnicities and it broke down, they further showed divide and conquer throughout the different races. So it was showing more about the divide and rule of the state, and and basically the outcome, whatever the young person's outcome was, which particularly was saying for Black Caribbean people in particular, if they don't aspire to much, so therefore they achieve nothing, and that's why they're achieving nothing. The curriculum within itself has a lot of policies that are entrenched, but doesn't make it a fairer system for people. So things like if a person's hairstyle is cut too short or they have an afro, that could lead them into being excluded from school. Children giving fist bumps, again, things that could be leading to exclusions from school. They gave a recommendation 13 for education was about promoting fairness and to build social and capital enrichment for all, it said. But so, and how they suggested they'll do that is to extend the school day. That's something that we've heard in general the government talk about with COVID. Let's extend the school day for certain pupils. But these same pupils that they're talking about, as their report saying, they're coming from a social economic background where they're, a lot of the time, they are carers for other family members. They have the culture where we go home and cook the family meals and so forth. So again, how is it going to happen? Or how is a policy, a curriculum that's so entrenched in such racial tension, how is it going to support these same individuals that they're recommending it's supposed to be making? It really isn't going to do that at all. A lot of staff as well. It didn't actually ask many teachers or any teachers, but a lot of the other reports, as Esther said, we go back to what teaching unions have put out. A lot of the BAME staff, so over 38% of Black and Asian staff have reported, especially even in the last 12 months, that they've felt racial discrimination has increased, racial tensions had increased, and that's from their peers. It's also from students as well, and that lack of progression opportunities are not there, and also staff are feeling that they've had to work harder to get to where they needed to get to. Okay, so in a nutshell, the report doesn't support anyone, and it's more as a driver for a political campaign for Middle England and to get their extra votes. That's who it's derived for. This report does not help Black Caribbean, Black African, even Pakistani people like that. It hasn't put any emphasis on there. There's no, those 24 recommendations they've put on a whole isn't helping nobody apart from the political vote of that Middle England who they want it for. And that's my quick nutshell.
Wonderful, thank you so much. I most certainly look forward to coming back because you've raised one of the questions I had in, like, who did they speak to? So yeah. It did leave me wondering that. So thank you so much. We very much look forward to your further contributions, and there's a lot happening in the chat as well. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Next, we go to Angela Ishmael. Angela, the stage is now yours.
Okay, Marilyn, can you give me the 2-minute warning, please?
I will most certainly do that.
Thanks very much. Thank you so much, first of all, Taryn, thank you so much for asking me to do this. This report angered me to such an extent in so many ways, not least because in the 25, 30 years plus that we've been campaigning to take our experiences, our lived experiences seriously, in the space of a few months or even a year, that report has actually undone a lot of what we've been trying to do as campaigners. Just taking Esther's point earlier in terms of institutional discrimination, institutional racism, let's be clear on the language. It's so important to be clear on the language, and the reason why I feel that this report has failed most of us in society. When we talk about institutional discrimination, Stokely Carmichael in the 60s, 1967, stated that it was very much about understanding that these are less overt, subtle, hidden, less identifiable forms of behavior that permeate society and that stop us from being who we are, and in a sense, produces that, that sense of with privilege. We've been talking about white privilege since, you know, from the BLM campaigns. the institutional racism, institutional discrimination is what underpins privilege. This report, produced by a Tory government based around privilege, serves actually for them to say institutional discrimination does not exist. And I just want to say that you know, we think back, this year is the 40th anniversary of Scarman. 40 years ago, the Scarman report was produced. And right the way through Lord Scarman's report, he gave lots of examples of why Black people, as termed at that time, were disaffected and why people were rioting. All of the examples were connected to institutional discrimination. You know, the examples in terms of what happens in education, why our Black children, Black boys especially at that time and still now, were being expelled from schools. What happened around that time, the mental health system, all of this was about institutional discrimination. Scarman listed them all, but failed to define institutional discrimination, institutional racism at that time. Again, just remember, this is the Thatcher government, there's another Tory government, and defining it then would have meant that the government would have to admit that every policy that they had perpetuated racism. So moving on then, we had Macpherson. And Macpherson, after, you know, as part of the Stephen Lawrence inquiry, and I'm mentioning all of these, and these are really important because they, in a sense, they're the backdrop to why this particular report has failed us. Macpherson was interesting because William Macpherson at the time actually did not want to define institutional discrimination because he felt that it detracted away from the fact that the police had failed the Lawrence family, and he wanted to focus on the acts and all of the behaviours within the police service at the time. But interesting enough, Sir Paul Condon, he was the police commissioner then at that time, said, well, look, I'm sorry, but I don't understand it. I do not understand what institutional racism is. You need to define it for us. Because in defining it, maybe I will get to understand what I need to do to change the police service. Unbelievably, and I felt it at the time, it was a red herring because it did shift away from the fact that the Lawrence family had again had a system, a racist system, fail them. Macpherson hurriedly, towards the end of the production of the report, came up with a definition. Interestingly enough, that definition was used in the Sewell report. It was used right at the very beginning of the report and said that the definition actually has served the UK really well. But at the moment, we think we need to move forward and not think about institutional discrimination and racism as
and
people.
just you've got 2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Thank you. As being applicable to everything in society, but for really, really, really bad cases of racism. I mean, how shameful can you get? I think that what we need to understand is that our laws, our discrimination laws, particularly in employment, are based on the premise of institutional racism and discrimination. This report has failed to acknowledge our lived experiences and failed to acknowledge that in practice, in employment practices, there's still a long way for people to go in order to progress and move into organisations. Yes, we have made some changes, and yes, we have made improvements, but people still face those glass barriers, and this report hasn't helped to change that. Marilyn.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much. And myself and many others in the chat are very appreciative of the history and background that you've given us, you know, reminding us of some of the things that have become before. So thank you so much for that. And I really look forward to getting to the Q&A. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Next to the virtual stage, we have Yvonne Ward. So Yvonne, please make your way to the stage. So Yvonne, I can't hear you as yet.
It's okay, I've unmuted and I'm here. Hi, good evening, everybody. So my reckoning of this report, I mean, I want to thank the speakers who've gone before me for raising the issues, and I did make some notes on that. So when we come to Q&As, I'll talk about it. But what I want to pull your attention to is actually the introduction of the report. So what we say is that this report really has no grounds. But if you look in the introduction, at the very introduction, it actually tells you where they got the source of data from. So they used data that was a government source of data. We don't have any kind of scrutiny on that, on the data that they have. And we don't know how the data is being collected. They say that they spoke to individuals, and what I have to confess is of not actually being able to go through the whole of the report, but reading in sections and chunks. So my issue is first of all, where is the source of data? And what I find most interesting is the fact that the collection of individuals that they have are all people of color, bar one that I can see. Now, my question is that a deliberate move? Did the government decide on this panel of people because they are people of color, or because they felt it would pacify the masses? Because if, you know, I mean, I go back to the 1990s and the recruitment of Black social workers, for example. One of the reasons for doing that was to allow Black to deal with Black, because the societies themselves did not know how to deal with us. So that's one point I want to raise. I want to draw your attention back to the beginning of that report and read that introduction and see what that introduction tells you. One of the issues that comes out just of that introduction is a couple of things that they cite. One, I've already mentioned, the data that they get from the data cabinet unit, it's a data collection unit. We don't know where that data is drawn from, what sections of society. So that's one point. The other point is that I want to pull your attention to, just in terms of looking at the similarities, the historical similarities that are always drawn up, that are always used as the flag waver when it comes to dealing with issues of race. Now, a couple of things they cite at the very beginning: family breakdown. We've heard this before. Issues with Black families. Family breakdown is a primary cause for disadvantage amongst Black people. The other thing that they've drawn upon is the fact that, and again, someone mentioned language. Language is critical. One of the things that they talked about is the 1980s being the rebellion era. I mean, I'm a young adult of the 1980s. I guess it's for how old I am now, but that is another issue. And then the shift to a more kind of a open discussion around white working class, and always bringing those as a comparative. But the most striking thing for me that was drawn out, and I say again at the introduction and as I went through the report, was a statement that was made suggesting that Black Africans who live in the UK, whose children are educated in the UK, seem to be doing better than our Black Caribbean children. And the other thing which angered me was to suggest that because of that, us Caribbean people need to get off our high horse and settle down, because it means that we cannot attribute that to race discrimination. So that's another point that I want to draw to your attention. And looking at a fairer landscape, you've got immigration and the accompaniment of that, and the Black African diaspora. None of that, as has been mentioned, has been discussed, okay, within this report. Then I want to also pull to your attention, or is a question I'm raising, I'll play devil's advocate. If we live in a country that is top of the class for race discrimination, we're not an institutionally racist society, why then do we have so many recommendations? For example, build social and cultural capital. if you are a society where you have an even playing field, why would you need to build social and cultural capital? Because, you know, that would already be there. Would that not be the solidifying brick of society? That is a question I'm throwing out. That's one thing. So look at the recommendations. The recommendations are telling you directly that we are still an institutionally racist society, because if we weren't, we would not have that many recommendations. I don't know where the lady's gone. Marilyn, I'm just seeing an image of you, beautiful as it is.
Just over you've got 2.5 minutes left.
2.5 minutes left. So for me, it is about language. Language is critical. We also have to note that the recommendations that are being made, and I just want to pull another point of interest to you about the term racism. Now, I'm going to ask anyone on the Bajan Hub, do you know where this term derives from? Do you know where it was created? Well, it was created in the 1600s in the island of Barbados. Yes? Yeah? And the reason for that was to separate and divide. The other thing I want to pull to your attention in my 2.5 minutes less is look at the word disparity. What does it mean? It means economic divide. If we were not a racist society, if we were a society that dealt on an even plane, then we wouldn't need to use words such as disparity. We would be talking about an even-handed level of work. And this is not about being conservative or Labour or Liberal, any of those things. It's just in terms of what Angela talked about before, in terms of language. So I think we need to draw our eyes back to what they're saying at the beginning. We need to question what sort of data that they've used. Can we, have access to that data? Did they speak to people? They said that they spoke to families. Where is this coming from? Where is this coming from? And if, my grandmother always said, if you know you are not something, you don't need to protest. And I'll leave it there.
Wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And yes, I've wondered the same thing as I was reading it. So yeah, very much looking forward to the Q&A. Next, we have Adrian Rollins. So Adrian, the virtual stage is now yours for you to give us your view of this report.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, good, I'm quite loud. I'm just going to basically almost repeat what's been said before, and as I agree with all the points made. I think from reading the report, the one thing that stands out to me is, or one of the things that stands out to me is, the reference, which I keep hearing, individual success stories does not mean that Britain isn't institutionally racist. There are lots of individual success stories, but what's being forgotten and kind of not addressed in this report, it's in spite of the barriers that have been put in place. So the success stories that we often hear about, and many of us could consider ourselves successful, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean it didn't happen without those barriers and those structural barriers being put up in front of us. As an educationalist, or even if I were to refer to my sports career, I mean, it was, some of these things were very, very public. So when it comes to reports, I think that's the one thing that stands out to me, that, okay, the reference is that people are successful, so therefore there's no racism. But to me, that's ludicrous. From an education point of view, and as a teacher who's in his 19th year teaching, for me, I very much question where the information came from, and in terms of, I didn't see teachers being consulted or black teachers. Just as a link to the discussion this evening, one of the the unions, their response to the report was actually so abysmal that a lot of black teachers have actually left that union, and it's one that references, educational leadership. I have left that union because their response was more about the funding, that they agreed on the funding, but again, they didn't acknowledge that institutional racism exists, and for me, that's a problem. So, as was said before, the Macpherson report, there's no reference there, and the Macpherson report was done, 20 years ago. and now all of a sudden 20 years later it's gone. And well, where has it gone to? And it's fun enough with this report, those who are in education may recall the Timpson Review in 2019, which looked at the exclusions of many pupils, and it showed that Black students were between 1.7 and 2 times more likely to be excluded than their white counterparts. So again, that's not been really addressed in the report, and why would that be? And if there is no institutionalized racism, are they then, it kind of ties with the data for me around the achievement, where they're trying to say, well, Afro-Caribbean students are not achieving and they're getting excluded. So therefore the problem lies with those students and not with the system. So for me, for example, recommendation 6, where it makes reference to getting past the bias, there is, the bias is there and it cannot be denied. And the other one that's always spoken about to me also is recommendation 13. So those who, I mean, I've worked in school for many, many years. We have after school, we have extended school activities. That's not new. Schools have been doing that. But in terms of actually rolling it out, it's, funding, schools are under massive constraints with funding. And now there's a recommendation that they're going to find this money. And that's what's said already in terms of capital and social capital and cultural capital. If these were not recommendations, with these recommendations there, that clearly highlights there is an issue. It's such an issue that, like, one thing I work for Ofsted, so I'm an Ofsted inspector. Within the Ofsted framework, the new Ofsted framework from September 2019, it makes reference to cultural capital in there in the new framework. And as an inspector and as part of our remit to inspect schools under what would be the personal development strand of the inspection schedule, it talks about cultural capital. Again, that clearly flags up that there's an issue. So for me, my take on it is that the report, it's something I almost said on Twitter probably a lot when the report came out. You've asked people who had this pre-conditioned idea that there was no institutional racism, who spent 8 months to produce a report saying there's no institutionalized racism. So therefore the report was always going to be what we expected it to be. So I'll just end on that note.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And can I please also just remind everyone to mute their microphones? There are several hundred people here, so it's also quite challenging to go and individually find you all. So for those who are maybe newer to Zoom, when you look at your own screen, you should see a red line through your microphone, and that means you are muted. So Anthony, if you happen to be listening, could you please mute your microphone? That would be amazing. But if everyone could just check, that would be really, really helpful. So our next speaker to grace the virtual stage is Richard Drayton. So Richard, the stage is now yours.
Thank you, Marilyn. Now, I'm not going to actually spend that much time speaking about the contents of what we should call the discredited Sewell report, because it has been discredited. It's been discredited in terms of those who've looked at the social science underpinnings of this report. It's been discredited in terms of even its composition and its argument. All I will touch on here is to read you the passage in which, for the one and only time, the Grenfell tragedy is mentioned. And this is one of the 2 sentences in which the Windrush scandal is mentioned. So the paragraph begins. The more recent instances, this is page 27, where ethnic minority communities have rightly felt let down, such as the Grenfell tragedy or the Windrush scandal, sparked genuine national grief over the traumatic loss of lives and widespread anger and remorse over the mistreatment of fellow citizens. Likewise, the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on some ethnic minority groups is partly explained by the prevalence of ethnic minorities who work on the front line and provide unpaid work in multi-generation households. Now, if you were to ask the question, what is the relationship of these 2 sentences to each other? In fact, they have no relationship, except to say that they realized they had to mention Grenfell somewhere, and they had to mention Windrush somewhere. And they chose to mention it not by actually going into the detail of these incidents, but simply to say that, well, the nation was disturbed by this. Now, of course, as we all know, neither the victims of Grenfell nor the victims of the Windrush scandal have yet received justice. Several years after this tragedy and this scandal were revealed. I mean, it's a bit like saying, apart from the fact that I broke your jaw and I punched you in the stomach, we've been okay, right? Everything's been good. That's the essential tenor of the report, to say, well, yes, of course, we know there are lots of people who happen to be racialized as Black, who are in prison, who should not be in prison, disproportionate numbers of ethnic minorities. We know about the wage gap, but still Britain is not racist, and we're doing better than our competing countries. Okay, we could spend a lot of time going through that. I want to do something very different in my 6 minutes left, which is to contextualize this report and to try to suggest, where it comes from and what its real meaning is. Now, back at the very origins of social science in the 19th century, one of its main purposes was explaining where poverty came from. And of course, what it sought to explain was that poverty was the fault of the poor. This goes back to the 19th century. When we step forward to the middle of the 20th century, in the wake of the kind of great welfare revolution that follows the 1930s and 40s, we see in the 1960s the emergence of arguments which again seek to explain why people are poor, why society is unequal, not in terms of what is wrong with society, but what is wrong with those who are in fact in underprivileged situations. So most famously, and this is the most important precedent for this report, the Moynihan report of 1965, called The Negro Family, said, okay, the problem with Black folk in America, this is the United States, is that they have a problem with their families. This was followed up with other kinds of reports which talked about, why these people are in trouble. Now, this drew on a kind of lineage of Black conservative thought, let's be quite clear, coming out of elements of the Black church, which sought to say, well, those of our lesser brethren, they're in fact not behaving as they should in terms of seeking their own uplift and the opportunities that exist in the society. In any event, Moynihan's report produced by 1771 a response from a sociologist called Tony Ryan, which had the title Blaming the Victim. So you know the phrase blaming the victim. This phrase begins, in fact, in describing the Moynihan report and the way in which it sought to explain the origins of racial inequality in the United States. Now, but what's interesting about this is that while the Moynihan report was discredited, it also became the germ of a particular structure of African-American conservative thought, which was actively promoted by corporations and by foundations, and for which the exemplar is a man with a very similar sounding name called Sowell, Thomas Sowell, who in the 1980s and 1990s made very Moynihan-esque reports about how, in fact, there was no such thing as structural racism, and in fact, that the problem with African Americans had to do with their ethics, their values, their family structure, essentially privatizing the responsibility for inequality onto the victims of social injustice. So that is the lineage out of which this report comes from. So we need to ask ourselves, what are its social purposes and how should we confront it? I think the key social purpose of this report can be contained within the phrase divide and rule. This report is all about divide and rule. We have the proposal, first of all, that Black and ethnic minority, Black, Asian, and minority ethnic, that should be done away with the category. Now, what are the politics of this? The politics of this is that ever since the 1970s, the idea of political Blackness, the idea that people who were Asian and people who were Bangladeshi, people who were Black, shared similar kinds of injustice, although experienced in different ways, was a very important political force. And that they want to derail that. It's also about dividing the Black community between the successful middle class, or you good middle class, you're educated, you have nice family structures, you're good Christians, from the working class, who of course, they are a problem. They are your problem in particular. But more importantly, it's about divide and rule between white people and Black people in this country. And it's about the ways in which the politics of conservatism in Britain has depended upon the creation of forms of social others against which conservatives, who are a party of property, can persuade a lot of very poor white people that they represent them. So the xenophobic treatment of minorities from Eastern Europe, produced by the Tory press in alliance with the Tory party, the criminalization and the stigmatization of people who are Islamic, associating them with terrorism and with rape gangs, this kind of meme, although in fact we know that most rapes are conducted by white men. The process of the creation of this fear of the cities. Can't go to London anymore. It's only Black people there. That kind of rhetoric which turned up on certain kinds of political platforms.
Just to say, we're going to have to ask you to start wrapping up.
I'll wrap up in 30 seconds. So what we're looking at here is a report which is linked to a politics of divide and rule. That is its ideological roots, and that's its ideological purpose. And it's about an attempt to explain inequality in ways which, in fact, blame the victim. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And before we move to our Q&A, Tyrone, do you have any thoughts on this report, or are you just happy to sit and listen to the debate? I'm just curious. And you're muted at the moment still.
I haven't read the report, but at the end of this, I will have some sort of opinion. But just reading from the reports, that it seems it's badly laid out. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. And for me, definitely, when I looked at this, there were a few things that really did stick out. There are some I can't even begin to sort of put into words, but really when it said that, the piece, then I'm going to summarize it in terms of my own words. When it said, well, you're in the classroom, you're doing well, therefore they can't be a problem. I at that point, all was lost for me in terms of not hearing the voices of many of us, I'm sure, have been in the room. You've seen what's going on around you, and you do well despite and in spite of what's going on around you. So for me, that was the glaring omission here, as has already been said, in using those success stories to then say, well, clearly there's not a problem. A bit like, when you're in America, they say, well, there's Oprah, so therefore it's okay, just because one or two people have been able to kind of fight against the odds. So it did make for very, very interesting reading. So we have a few people who definitely want to come on board. So Tyrone, I don't know if you're going to have to do the unmuting or if they have the power to unmute themselves, but I did notice that Jan Hunt had raised her hand quite early on. So Jan, if you are able to unmute yourself, please do so. And if not, Tyrone, you might have to scan through the names and find Jan.
Hi, Marilyn. I'd raised my hand just simply to ask why the chat had been disabled. That was all. But I do have a message, a question that I want to ask a bit later on when the opportunity arises.
The opportunity is now. We're moving into the Q&A. And if you want to put your camera on so we can see you, that would be great as well. But yes, please state your question while you are here.
Right, okay. I mean, it's just a simple sort of grassroots question, really, regarding what individuals can do who aren't connected to civil service, education, law, or other organisations. What can they be doing to challenge, racist frameworks within their communities and workplaces? It's a bit of a loaded question, I do get it, but if there's anything that people can do, individuals who now need to start joining in that galvanization, really, in order to be heard and for things to change, because it's quite clear that when we leave the decision making, the changes don't get made by these large bodies. It's down to us to try and bring those changes up. Yeah.
Wonderful, thank you. So I can see Adrian is kind of waving his hand. So Adrian, we'll go to you first.
Oh, no, that's just my big hands in front of my face, but I can answer that. I mean, essentially, your network is your net worth. So if I take on WhatsApp, I'm part of groups where there are, you know, ethnic minority teachers, Black teachers, where there's 200. I think the maximum you can have in a WhatsApp group is 200. So the key thing is to network, because I can have a conversation with my head teacher, and to be honest, she's really open and she's really coherent, and that's great. But I can't do anything by myself. To me, it's essential that you network, and that through your network, when you come together, for example, BAMED in education, that's quite a large organization. Within some of the unions, there are ethnic minority, there are Black kind of subgroups, but for me, it's around the network and then coming together as a collective, so you can have that shared message, which what a lot of the groups that I work within, that's what we're doing, because it is so difficult. I've been in senior leadership for nearly 8 years in secondary schools. I've been the only non-white person around the table in all of those schools. So, and in some of those situations, it's just not been possible to have those conversations. But within the network, it's highly valuable. That's what I would say.
Marilyn, if I could come in here very quickly. I think the most important thing you could do as a private person is to document. And by documenting, I mean keeping a record of your experiences, collecting a record among those who are common experiences in the institution which you're part of, not just facts, also your feelings. This could be expressed either in something which you publish factually, or in a work of a poem or a work of art, a work of literature. But to create a concrete record of your lived experience, which these people are trying to deny.
Thank you. Please, Angela.
Yes, I think, and I agree with, absolutely agree with both Richard and Adrian in terms of taking personal action. I'm going to just address what happens in the workplace, because it can be so difficult if you're in a minority in the workplace. And yes, I mean, networks are brilliant, but if you're not able to do that, you know, one of the things that BLM has helped with, Black Lives Matter campaigning has helped with, is to get people to talk to their colleagues. And it's useful to have, just to sit down and think about who you work with. Have a trusted 10, white people, whoever. Just look at that as trusted 10. I mean, trusted with in quotes, I say, and get them to think about their own privilege and how that potentially has affected you and people around you in the workplace. And I think it's just about being able to have a candid conversation that says, look, you know, although I or have been, or potentially have been on the receiving end of racism or discrimination, what is it that you can do as a white person to speak up against it? Because for too long, we're always expected to be the ones to have to fight ourselves. And it's time that we galvanize other people into action. And that's one of the good things about the BLM movement.
Any of our other panelists want to contribute to that one?
I was just going to say exactly the same thing what Angela picked up on, that you have to work with, it's a holistic approach. You can't be just saying it's a Black issue, it's a white, you know, you all have to come together. If Black Lives Matter movements, all the marches we've seen showed us that it's, you know, everybody was there. It wasn't just about Black people on those front lines, it was everybody. And that is the way to move forward. And it is as well, as said before, about talking to unions, speaking to your HR, getting more involved with people within our communities. We have to handle this together.
Can I ask the question in reference to the churches?
But not at the moment. We're just going to have our panelists contribute to this question, then we'll get to the next question. If you can hold on just for one moment.
If I can come in, if that's okay, it's Yvonne here. One of the things that I would say, I would agree with everything that everyone said about, you know, networking, getting your narratives down, you know, all of those things. But my question to all of us really is, are those not things that we've already done and still results in a report such as this? So I think that we actually need to be more proactive. If you look around in this virtual room, how many people are in this room? So I think that if this is a report that's done by the government, this is supposed to be representative of us as Black people in this, and let's bring in the white working class, because they always cite the white working class. So I think we need to become a much more powerful force and use the forums that we have, such as the Bajan Hub, because we are the people with the narrative. We are the ones with the lived experience. We are the ones going into the workplace. You know, if you're a white woman with a Black child, you're going to experience the same things. If you're a white man with a Black child, you and your children are going to experience exactly the same thing. And what we don't want in this 21st century, or wherever we are in the globe now, is a repeat of this. You know, we don't want, you know, I came to the UK in the 1970s, and these things were upon me for the very first time. And I've lived with that in this country ever since. I don't want my grandchildren, my children have come and they've lived through this experience, they've experienced it. And I don't want my grandchildren or my grandchildren to be sitting in the seat where we are now. We need to be more proactive. And if that means that we need to get a change survey going and lobby the government to look at this report and change, I think that that is what we need to do. The other thing that I would say to each and every individual, whether you're Black, white, Asian, or whatever your cultural background is, we need to change the language, people. I am not a BAME. I am a Black woman. I am not ashamed to say that. Why are you referring to me as a BAME? And then you're going to tell me that we're not institutionally racist. And why are you not comfortable in saying who I am? Yeah, my culture, you know, although I am an African Caribbean, and there, because of the diaspora and where we've lived, we have a different experience, but we are one and the same people. But we all live in this society. We're all a part of this society. We recognize as a group that this report is inaccurate. And by going around and forming networks, I mean, I've been in networks I've been to, and here's a classic example. I went to a Black workers meeting in my workplace, only to find I was the only Black worker there. Yeah. And my white seniors were busy documenting what was being said. And I'd encourage another couple of Black colleagues to come along. We don't want a repetition of it. We do not want to be talking about this 20 years and sitting with our rocking chairs saying, oh, I remember. We don't want that. We need to take affirmative action. So we need, as a group, as a hub, to make a decision about how we take this forward. There are many scholars in this group. Why can we not do our own research? Why can we not challenge it? We're all scholars, the ones that spoke, I've seen. We need to be more proactive. So I would say, first of all, as an individual, start changing the language. If you change the language, and I'll give you one example before I close what I'm saying now. We can talk about disabled people, but when we say disabled, that we're making reference to the points that things that people cannot do. If we refer to the individuals being differently able, we are acknowledging, someone needs to mute, then we are acknowledging that these individuals have the same capabilities, but they approach it differently. So we need to look at the language, first of all, as Black people, and change that language. I think when we change language and get the individuals to confront, yes, I'm Black, yes, you're Asian, yes, you're Chinese, no, we're not BAME. What is it? And I will leave it there.
Great, thank you so much. If we have concluded with that question, and that's even the wrong term, this is not something that will be concluded in a conversation, because I remember in the 1980s hearing some of these conversations, and here we are in 2021. So we're going to move now to our next question. And also just to say, I can see that some people have raised their hand. Ideally, we will not come to you if your camera is switched off, because we do want to see the faces of the people who are speaking. So there was a gentleman, I don't know your name, unfortunately, it just said iPhone, who had just interjected. If you are here.
I think it was Lester Burke.
Okay, Lester, if you're here, do you want to come in and let us have your question, please? And if not, I will.
Hi, I think it's possibly me. I think Billy D. Bignall from the Educators Network, educatornetwork.com, or is that who you're referring to?
No, it wasn't. It was a gentleman who was.
I'll mute my mic then.
I just mentioned that I came here in the 60s and the racism is going on, and we as Black people are just as guilty to some of our Asian colleagues. When you mentioned earlier about looking at ourselves, we have to look at ourselves in terms of the racist attitude some of us have to the Asian colleagues. Also, let me go back to what I initially wanted to talk about. I had a meeting 2 weeks ago with the church about the racism within the church. And it's interesting to find that the Bishop of Birmingham have appointed a lady called Sharon Prentice to look at the racism within the church based upon a report, the Equal Opportunity Report, about 20 years ago, and nothing has happened at all. We're asking the bishop now to look at Black Lives Matters, and I had to force him to acknowledge that there is racism within the church. I'd like to hear, if possible, some comments in regarding to the churches that we as West Indians talk about Christianity regarding to the church in their discrimination matters.
Great. And can I ask you now to please mute your microphone again? Thank you. And did any of our panelists want to come in on that? I know it takes us in a slightly different direction, but did any of you want to comment?
I don't mind commenting. I was raised in the church in Barbados, and I understand the church. Also, we need to look at the church from the Afrocentric point of view. And if we want to link it to this report, then it is fair to say that the church was always used as a divide and rule. That is why in the Caribbean, for example, you find that there are so many different churches. And that was one way to set up us against each other. So that also links into what the questioner was referring to in terms of internal racism, that's what I refer to it, between Blacks and Asians. So some of it is coming from that. In terms of getting the church to make changes, I mean, I have to say I'm not a church goer anymore, but I would think that the same applies as what we're doing in this meeting. We have to challenge racism from all perspectives within society because it affects us. We're the Black people that they use as guinea pigs, that they use as study mules, you know. So we will have to make some of those changes ourselves. I think time has gone now for relying on others to do the work that we can now do for ourselves. Before we could say that we didn't have the education, we didn't have the expertise, but we have that now. And I think that we need to learn to use it rather than to rely on other people. So I think my point of view, as far as the church is concerned, think about how the church has been used within the Black community and how that has internalized racism within our own communities. And now we need to think about how we as a Black community who, you know, many of us still live by the church, how we can offset. Don't forget, the church, even in British society, it's the church who set up the schools, who they still own in this United Kingdom. The church still own most of the land in the country. They're the ones who set up the schools. They're the ones who set up, you know, all of these things in the beginning because of Christian and missionary duty. So I think, as I've said before, now is the time for us to be proactive, whether that's in the church, in the local community, in our schools. We can no longer rely on other people. We have to rely upon ourselves. So that is my call to everyone this evening. Let us rely on ourselves and use the expertise that we have. I hope that's given some resolve to your question, sir.
Great, thank you. And also just a reminder, with the questions, with the comments, if we can keep it to some of the subjects we've been talking about today, that would be fantastic. It may be that there's another forum that comes thereafter. And also to say, if you have raised your hand, we would prefer that those of you with your camera switched on are the people we will go to. So the next person I can see who has raised their hand and who has their camera on, let me just scroll there. So Wayne, I'm going to ask if you would like to unmute and if we can have your question.
Hi, good evening. Listen, first of all, I want to congratulate the person who said they've read the report, because I'm still plowing through it. And one of the things we have to be very careful of is that this report was not written for us. This report was written as a conservative handbook, and for those right-wing journalists who are going to use it, quoting these statistics. I mean, it's reading the report, you have to switch back to a lot of other documentation that they've been cited. Just an example, and how it's written. For example, one of the speakers mentioned that Grenfell and Windrush was mentioned only on page 27, but hidden inside there is the conclusion to the reaction to Grenfell disaster and the scandal of Windrush was to tell us that these are not things that happen by design, right? And that was the main conclusion that they wanted to push there. And also what you have is that there has been a deliberate attempt to find a lot of subcategorization of the African community. So we have African, Black African boy, Black African Caribbean. Then there's an attempt to divide the Africans into Somalians and Sub-Saharan Africa. And we don't see the same being applied to Chinese who are meant to be doing well, or the Indians, right? There's no subcategorization for these other groups. The only subcategories are applied to the African diaspora. So, I mean, I'm still going through the report and I'm still having to read all of this data and look at the conclusion. Some of the conclusions are ridiculous in terms of, for example, hate crime. They say hate crime is on the decrease. So there's no need to worry, about hate crime. But when you go to the data, it shows you reported hate crime on the increase, 131% over the last 10, 15 years. But then they say, well, the police data is not correct.
Wayne,
so
did you have a question?
The question, or more statement, I think we don't, look, people getting angry, but I would suggest that you don't stress yourself out and when reading this report, because it's not designed for us. 90% of the people will never read this report, right? I'm only reading it because I have nothing else to do, right? And I need to be able to, if I get on the radio or something to respond to some of these things, I need that. But so I would say, read the report, but look at the data also. The data is there, it's ONS data, it's well documented, but you will probably come to different conclusions.
And Jocelyn, did you have something that you wanted to add in there? I'm just looking also at the chat.
No, I was just agreeing exactly what you were saying, that a large majority of people will not read this report. And that was it, really.
Could I say something?
Yeah, please do, Angela.
Yeah, sure. Yes. In principle, I'm in agreement with you. And Richard actually said in his talk that we need to actually look at how this report is positioned and why it's been written in the way that it has. I mean, it's been criticised. It's badly written. I noticed a little piece where they talk about how some discrimination is illegal. Even that, people who are lawyers in the room know that discrimination law, you talk in terms of lawful and unlawful and not legal and illegal, because it's not criminal, it's civil. You know, just little things like that are really quite annoying about the report. But the one thing I think that we should not underestimate, we need to not be complacent about why this report has come out in the time that it has, and why it was initially, why the inquiry was initially asked for. The inquiry was asked for because of the Black Lives Matters campaigns. And we really shouldn't forget that this report was an opportunity to think through about structural racism in our society and come up with some concrete, objective proposals for further continuing to break that down. And it hasn't done that. It hasn't done it. So I absolutely agree that the report, in some respects, we shouldn't take it too seriously. Having just said that, we really need to remember why the report exists, and it's a reminder for us, as people who are affected by things like this, to galvanize ourselves into action and to ensure that we don't let things like this rule our lives in the future.
I'd like to say something based on what Angela said, and also Wayne. I am partially in agreement with you, Angela, in terms of the report, and many of the things that you've said tonight I actually agree with. But one of the things, even the gentleman who was speaking earlier, the professor, I've forgotten your name, I do beg your pardon. When I first glanced the report, and there's been lots of discussion about the report and a lot of talk about anecdotal evidence, and I'm inclined to agree with the anecdotal side of things. I don't think it was properly done, properly structured. If you're going to look at a report like this, I would think it would need to be a longitudinal study to look at things and have a very wide perspective and get those narratives and talk. So I agree with that. The other thing I want to tip on, Angela, in terms of what you said, in terms of Black Lives Matter, and I want to focus our attention for the moment, on COVID-19 and all the things that have happened whilst we've been in lockdown. And if you think of what was happening in the United States, and we kind of mirror, a lot of what happens in the States over here in the UK, and think of what's been happening up in Bristol in the last couple of weekends, and the issues that have been going on. My feelings were, and I think the professor gentleman mentioned something like this, so putting context into this report, I firmly believe that a part of this report and the predetermined conclusion, I'll say that, the predetermined conclusion, I think it's also about the government trying to make sure that we have some kind of balance to safeguard against social unrest. Because if you look at what's been happening in America, we're all suffering from lockdown fatigue. The issues are happening. Our children seem yet to be further disadvantaged in education. Look at the recommendations in terms of the health disparities. It's all talking about those things. So I think that you are correct that the Black Lives Matter triggered it, but I also feel that they used it, if you like, as a bandwagon to sit on to say, oh, let's do this report. We need to quash social anxiety about the racial disparities. It's more evident now because COVID-19 made everything so crystal clear. And I really think the context within this report, particularly the way I feel it was kind of rushed and put together, and look at the timing of the release. So I really do believe that a lot of this has got to do with trying to quell social unrest. And that social unrest being linked to race. If you look at, the gentleman who spoke before, I think his name was Wayne, the iPad, he mentioned about subcategories. But one thing I would say is that you always have to remember that there have always been subcategories when it comes to Africans, and us Caribbeans are a part of that, because it was the way that our diaspora has unfolded with slavery and all the rest of it. and they needed to divide. So the only way that the colonizer can really describe us is through those subcategories, because they still, even in today, need to keep us divided. Because if we come together as a force, like in those 18, 15, and 1300s, then they feel that they would lose control. The other thing to say is that, look around this room. There are many scholars in this room. We had to fight for that. We really did. And our Black men up until today are still socially disadvantaged. You know, they gave the propeller to Black women to get on that social ladder. They left our men behind. And that is an aftermath, if you like, from that same colonized era. So if we think of the way history has brought us to where we are today, think of the timing of the report and all what's going on within the world. I do believe, yes, Black Lives Matter was a trigger point for it, and it needed to happen to some extent. But I also believe that this report is a bit like a white flag. Oh, keep peace, everything's all right, no trouble here. Yeah, but they still say we have that chip on our shoulder, and that is why they're trying to keep us silent in a sense. So I agree and I disagree at the same time.
Right, and I'm going to see if Richard Drayton wants to come in here, because Richard, you've been mentioned several times in terms of contributions you've made and things that you said. Did you have anything you wanted to add at this point?
No, I think that point that was just made a moment ago, that this is very much linked with the politics of the next year to come and the next 2 years to come, is well worth bearing in mind. That they are concerned about the ways in which the pandemic has produced greater inequality, has also produced new kinds of politicization. They are desperate to direct the public discourse away from the fact that this country has had 150,000 people die in the last year, which, one of the worst death rates per capita in the world. They don't want us to talk about that. They want to talk us about, they want, in fact, poor white people to have this sense of resentment against minorities who are immigrants or people of color who have somehow demanded the public attention and who have demanded the sympathy of the nation when we, the white British people, in fact, and of course there's a great deal of pandering to that within the report, because that is linked to the politics of the present and the way in which the Conservative Party from that 2019 election tried to position itself and to pull into its wake all of the Brexit Party supporters, so that this kind of pitch they're making for the red wall in the north, now they're probably going to win in Hartlepool in May, thanks to the terrible leadership of the Labour Party, which is another story. But the politics of whiteness in this country has become extremely important for how the Conservative Party pulls together its electoral mandate. And it's transformed the Conservative Party from a party which could barely win more than 40% of the vote into a party that actually is able to consolidate a large working majority, which it hasn't really for quite a long time. They have been in power, but it's been very, very slim until Boris Johnson's last election. And if you look at what these guys like Dominic Cummings and so on were trying to do, they were trying to construct this kind of politics of whiteness to create their own working class electoral base. So this is what this report is about. So that's why I would certainly agree this is certainly for us to put us in our place. This is intended to put us in our place and to kind of to provide a weapon for journalists and politicians to say, oh, just back off, you all. You all are complaining, making a fuss. In fact, this country is giving you better opportunity than France or Germany or anywhere else. And you're all making a fuss. In fact, look at the poor white people in the north and how they are not, how they in fact are performing even worse in schools, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is certainly a weapon to be used against us, but it's not really about us. This is intended to build the politics of white resentment, which is part of the politics of the Conservative Party. Yeah. Anyway, I could go on, but I'll shut up there.
Thank you, Richard. And I can see we've got 7 hands raised, and I'm also conscious of time. So I will definitely say, as I come to you, I will say your name and then I will ask you to unmute. And if you have a very short statement you wanted to make in response, a couple of sentences, that would be wonderful. And then if you let us have your question, that would be amazing as well, because as much as we'd love to hear all of your full contributions, we would be here probably till midnight, and that is not possible. So the next person I'm going to come to is Terry. So it says Terry's iPad, and I'm just kind of asking you to unmute.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good, good. Okay. First of all, I'm surprised, everybody's surprised about this report. This report would be nothing than what I've expected. I thought it would have been the same as exactly what it said in there. And I can't believe we're having these same conversations in the 21st century. So my question to the panel, I'm going to keep it short. We have all these forums, we have all these WhatsApps, and we have all these groups. What we need now, we need a definite platform to take us forward. A definite platform that we're going to get to the right people, such as to certain people into the government. So I think the media can play a big part in this. I think several people, I think the platform, like the footballer there, when he uses his platform to help the kids, the starving kids. So we need to put a positive note to the government to let him know that this report is a joke. We shouldn't be talking about this in the 21st century. To say that there's no racism within the institution, all you've got to do is look at the Windrush. Now, I just want to know to the panel, I think we can use the media to go forward. But coming away from here today, me personally, I would like to know what platform we're going to use to take what we've been discussing forward to certain people within the government to let them know that this report is absolute joke. Thank you.
Thank you. And which of our panelists would like to comment on what Terry has just shared?
I think we should collect a bunch of questions at the same time, because otherwise we won't have time to answer them all well.
Unfortunately, I would still have to unmute every single person and see what they wanted to say. So if you can think of an elegant way to do that, are you saying you want to hear every single person's question and then cycle through and answer them? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Marilyn, just a word. Because of the constraint by time, just get a couple of questions from the audience and then we put them to the panelists rather than just one question at a time. Okay.
Yeah, so that's fine, as long as everybody will remember the questions. That's absolutely fine. So if you are not writing the questions down, you might want to do that, just so we'll say, okay, question 1, question 2, question 3. So the next person I can see is, it says Chucks. No, actually, you don't appear to be at your desk. So we're going to go to Sarah. Sarah Sewell, are you there?
I am, and it's Sarah Sewell. And I wanted to say, thank you, Marilyn, that I am no relation to Dr. Tony Sewell. Can you hear me?
I think she's frozen.
Yes, we can hear you. What's your question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Hello.
Yes, can you hear me?
So I wanted to respond to Jan. First of all, because she said, what can she do? And I wanted to let her know in solidarity that I too am not a lawyer or working public policy. I work for a market research company and I run the ethnic minority staff network. And one of the things we managed to lobby our company to do is to publish the ethnicity pay gap for the first time this year. And my question to the panel is, how do I find a way, or how do we find a way to make sure that our board is ethnically diverse by introducing targets without it looking like it's tokenism?
Can I ask, you say, sorry. When you say targets, are you talking about targets for recruitment of Black staff? What sort of targets are you referring to?
I'll explain. So our company is broken down into levels of staff. So the most senior person in the organization is a level 1, and the most junior person is a level 7. And based on the ethnicity pay gap report that we've written, there are no ethnic minorities at level 1. There are 13% at level 2, and it gets higher the lower down you go. So we need to get someone on the board who is from an ethnic minority background, but we need to recruit that person or promote that person without it seeming as if it's a tokenistic appointment.
And I would ask, is your company averse to making the statement that they are underrepresented in certain minority groups within certain divisions of your company?
We've already done it by publishing the report.
Right. So now that you've published the report, then the question I would pose, and I would start with the HR department because they would have most of the leeway in terms of that and getting, making that a part of the company. It would be to, for me, others may come in, but to be speaking directly to the HR to find out what they're going to do. And you could approach that in 2 ways. One, they could advertise, and they could advertise under the Race Equality Act 2010 for specific groups. That's one thing that they can do to directly, and that would be a direct acknowledgement, a public acknowledgement, if you like, that we have the disparity and we are trying to correct it. The other thing that you could, your groups could lobby the HR to think about is how you get a promotional step up for other people. So one of the things that I created for our company was a step up. So you create a course, the staff will go in, they will step up to that, step up to the different levels until they reach. So that's a bit like how apprentices work. So that's a second way that can be approached. And in my thinking, that's more subtle. Rather than saying you're a racist organization, you don't promote Black people, it's saying, look, you've got a discrepancy here. We need to address the issue for everyone to feel comfortable and for them to get the best talent. So one way to do that is to have a step up program which will enable people to step up. They may not have the formal qualifications. Need to acknowledge that. That might be the first thing that they come with, but don't have formal qualifications. We know our diaspora in terms of education. So if they do that, then that helps the individual to step up there. And then also, when it comes to the recruitment, they need to recruit under the Race Equality Act and specify for that. Someone in the panel who may be more averse to organizations may be able to comment from a learning and development point of view. That is certainly something I would look at.
Sorry, Bev. Sorry, but can I just say it's the Race Equality Act no longer exists, it's the Equalities Act.
Equality Act, yes, I knew I was fumbling. Yeah, thanks for that.
Yeah, so that's all right, no worries, no worries. I mean, first of all, one of the most important thing is that your organization, your senior management, your leaders are shown to be committed. HR are just facilitators of what your leaders really ought to be doing. There's no point in doing any of this unless your leaders are committed to inclusive leadership and they are committed to creating an environment that will accept and will allow us as Black people to flourish. There's no point in doing that because people have got really good records in terms of getting lots of people into the organization, but people leave because the environment does not exist for us to flourish, and that's really what we're talking about. So aside, the law allows you to take positive action, not positive discrimination, but positive action. And it's just as Yvonne was saying in terms of a particular internal program. The Step Up program sounds really good. I think things like inclusive performance, about succession planning, anything that will allow particular positive action programs to take place to enable people to move up the organization. But while that's happening, you have to address those glass barriers. If those barriers are not being addressed, there's no point in doing any of this.
Thank you both.
Great, thank you. So just in terms of timing, we've probably got another 15-20 minutes before we start to think about bringing the evening to a close. So in terms of your preference, would you want to hear a summary of questions and then sort of come in, or did you want to come in with your specialist expertise, just so I'm clear how we get maximum value from this and what you would prefer? If that is the case, we'll go to each of the people who have their hands raised. We'll hear their question, we can collect them, and then we can come back to them individually, or we can try and just interject as we go. So please let me know in the chat what you prefer, because I would like to make sure that we try and hear from as many people as we possibly can while we are here this evening. So the next person I can see is Mark Morris.
Was we go this year?
That's not me.
No, we're asking for Charles Morris. Charles Morris.
Oh.
We would have gone to Manchester.
Is that out to Jenny?
Yeah, near there, yeah.
Just want to mute a few people that I can see unmuted, just to
Marilyn?
Yes?
Can you invite the Reverend Charles Morris, the Deputy High Commissioner, to the platform, please?
Yes, I can't, he's not letting me, I have to move my screen, but if he is listening and he can unmute, then that will be great. But let's see. Oh, I know, let me do it this way. Okay, so it looks as though Charles is actually unmuted as far as I can tell. So he should be able to speak.
Good evening, everyone. Let me first thank you all on behalf of the High Commissioner and the entire Barbados High Commission for sponsoring this event this evening. The High Commissioner has other commitments and therefore he was unable to attend. I sat and I listened to the discussions, and let me commend the panelists. But if I tend to favor Professor Drayton, it's because I myself am a student of history and I would be interested in these matters. From what I can gain from all of this is that the report that has been published, like Caribbean slavery, is fraught with contradictions. And sometimes we have to be very careful. Now, I would prefer a written response to the report. It is okay for us to debate and discuss, but in the end, we have a thesis. We would need the antithesis coming from all of this, a response to the report. Therefore, I would want to hear about the definition, because the committee may very well be right. According to their definition, there may be no racism, institutional racism in Britain. That's their definition. But at the same time, the mere fact that you have to deal with something or appoint a committee to deal with something means that there is a problem. So you can't deny in your report that is a problem, but still you have a report dealing with the problem. The other thing that we need to look at is the evidence in the report that says there is no, because I have not read the report myself, but we have to look at what the report says, or the evidence that it is used to say that there is no institutional racism, and then we can counter that with the corresponding evidence. So I think that is where we need to go as well. One of the issues I heard again, are Blacks in the United Kingdom treated differently in the schools from the whites? Is there evidence of that? What about the teachers in the school? Are the curricula different for one class over the other? The other thing we may also need to look at is this term of labeling. Now, when I first came here, one of the first things that I heard is about Windrush. Then I heard beam. And the moment you begin to compartmentalize individuals, you are creating differences. The moment you put them into groups, you are creating differences. My thoughts on this is simple. When you tell me, if I come and hear this person is a Windrush person, I'm not going to think immediately that this person is white. I'm going to think that they come from the Caribbean and that they're immigrants and that they can be sent home at any point. If you tell me this is a beam, immediately I am going to think of a particular person. So it is these terms that bother me. And as Black people, we should not allow ourselves to be compartmentalized like that. So I would expect that we would come and give a response to the report itself. And somebody is talking about Black Lives Matter, yes, but what about the teaching of history in the schools? Is it taught fairly? Are the students taught that Britain itself developed on the backs of the Caribbean? But are they being taught that Britain itself almost emasculated an entire race of people in the Caribbean? You see, it is okay to talk about teaching history. Teaching history must be taught fairly and properly. Otherwise, we will always be dealing with this issue. So I believe that we can put a response to this, just as there is a written document saying that there is no institutionalized racism. I believe that there should be a document saying that we have this gathering here. There should be a document saying, given the evidence, that there is. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your contribution. And yes, I think that is the consensus of many here in terms of looking at how we move forwards. Now, in terms of, time, the amount that people want to share, the number of people that want to share it is always a balance with any event. The agreement today, we'll try and take as many people's voices as we could in terms of those who wanted to speak. And I recognize there's a lot in the chat as well. So we have about 10 minutes left, and this is a big topic, and so it was always going to be challenging to cover everything that everyone wanted to say. So my suggestion in terms of just hearing from a few people, if you have a very direct question, if you could just come in and say, my question is, let us have your question. We'll take 3 or 4 of those questions, and then the panelists who feel that they can best speak to that can come in and we'll just do a quick fire round. And I know Bajan's quick fire, those two things might not go together, but we will see how it goes. So in terms of the order that I can see on my stage, I'm going to be coming to Mark, then Sam, then Billy, and then V. And I'll see how far we get with that. And then if possible, I'll move on a little bit further because I can also see Alison and Bab. So let's see how this goes in terms of state your question. Once we've collected the questions, we'll come back and see which of our panelists can speak to what you've raised. So Mark, if we could go to you first, please. What's your question?
Yep, I'll be very quick. So the report says, and I'm wondering why it is that so many Black voices with a position of influence are against the term white privilege and white fragility. And I want to know if the panel's opinion of what the replacement they want to use, which is affinity bias, and what impact that would have. I've got my own opinion, but it's, like I said, time short.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that. Sam, what is your question, please? Now, Sam, for some reason, you are unmuted, but we cannot hear you. Don't know why that is, but you definitely are unmuted. We'll come back to you in a few moments just to see if we can get that sorted out, but we can't hear what you're saying at the moment. So Sam, we'll be back in a moment. Billy, let's come to you.
Hi, how you doing? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. Very quickly. So my name is Billy D. Bignell. I'm from the Educators Network Limited and the educatornetwork.com. Firstly, I've got to commend Richard Drayton. I'm a bit of a historian myself. And one of the things with me is I've got a degree in applied science. And when I was listening to a lot of the things in the 1990s, you know, when they were talking about mad cow disease and stuff like that, I decided from then that I wasn't going to, you know, consume pharmaceuticals. But what I'm going to say about Tony Sewell is that even white supremacists and racists say that the system is institutionally racist. So I'm not even going to go there. So, you know, we all know that, that it was a very flawed report. Now, importantly, we deal with solutions. Just to cut a long story short, just in reality, all the young leaders that I know, some of them wouldn't want to be prime minister because they don't want to take a pay cut. Some of them don't want to be puppets. And one of the things that I acknowledge is that we do need a young leader like that to be a prime minister so that we can avoid what's going on. But just to want to run something through by you guys, I'm just going to ask a question which is deliberately asked in this way. Does anyone realize that you've been told that you need to pay to breathe fresh air? And if you don't pay to breathe fresh air, you need to restrict your breathing with a mask? I'm just asking. So what I'm explaining is that some people create problems to sell solutions, okay? What we do... in
excess of time, we're not going to be able to take more than
definitely,
one. Is that your question?
definitely. Yeah, that's all. Thank you very much for the platform.
Wonderful, thank you. And that's a very interesting question for sure. Wonderful, wonderful. So Sam, let me come back to you just to see if we've resolved that. So no, we still can't hear you. For some reason, we cannot hear you. I'm really sorry. We'd love to hear what you've got to say. But V, I'm going to come to you next.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Thank you, NCBA, for hosting this discussion this evening. My question is this. We have discussed the report. Can you not hear me properly?
No, we can hear you perfectly fine.
Oh, I thought somebody said something. Okay, right. My question is this. We've discussed the report. So what do we do now? How do we make it clear that the Black community rejects this whitewash? Will a committee now be formed to write a response? What are we going to do? Are we just going to sit around talking about it on and on and on and on and on? We need to take action. We cannot just sit down and discuss. We need to respond.
Thank you, V. Alison, over to you. Do you have, let's have your question.
Yes, so I've put my question in the chat as well, but I think what tonight's highlighted is there's been several reports written about us and we've never had the progress that we should have had. So we've got to start helping ourselves. When you listen to people like Akala, they've done really well. They talk about Saturday schools. So it'd be great if, you know, the panel could give some solutions about what are we going to do next, because in 20 years' time, there'll be another report that we're not happy about, but nothing would have changed. And it'd be great to come to a meeting where we're saying, right, this is the plan and these are all the little bits that you need to do. So it'd be great to hear about that from the panel. And I think that's what we've seen other ethnicities come to the UK and do. And this report to me just is a warning from the government of we're not going to help you. That's.
Thank you very much. And let me see. So Sam, I'm going to try again. And I really do want to hear what you've got to say. And Sam, it doesn't seem like it's going to work. So do you want to type what you want to say into the chat and we'll take it from there? Because for some reason it is just not working. So, okay, let's see. So we're going to go to the panel with the questions we've got so far. Let's see how many of those we can get through. And if there's one that you particularly want to speak on, and I guess the biggest theme so far is where do we go from here and what do we do? So which of our panelists would like to come in on that theme and that question?
While I'm here, I've had a lot to say this evening, and I will say again what I said initially, was that I think it's time for action. I think that we have gone through these things before. What I'm appealing to this panel today, that we need now to come forward again and have a meeting to discuss how we move forward, whether we're going to counter it with our own research, for example. Are we just going to lobby and let the lobby fall upon deaf ears, you know, no matter how many signatures? We'll get the signatures, they'll debate it in Parliament, and then we'll, be back to square one. So I think, as I said before, it's time for affirmative action, and I think the panel here. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, it kind of dropped off. I think it's time for us to do something. I like the discussion tonight, but as the speaker said a moment ago, we need to do stuff. So I'm voting for coming around the table, all the scholars and whoever else wants to be involved, and let's get a plan of action together. That's what I would like to see.
I'll just add to that. I mean, I can't really add much more to that. I'm total agreement. I think maybe as a quick win, something that we can do now in terms of the council is to have a statement around how we feel about this, get together and agree. I'm a practitioner. I'm not a scholar. I will say that. I am a practitioner. I believe in getting out there and doing what we need to do in order to facilitate change. And I'll be 100% behind any action that will do that.
Practitioners or scholars, Angela? Just work on practical knowledge.
Wonderful. Any of other panelists want to come in terms of where do we go from here and what's next?
Well, I think that Alison Tyndall has very helpfully been posting a number of links in the chat stream of the fact that noting the fact there have already been responses that have been made to this report. And that they also exist in the public domain, some very important documents such as the Stuart Hall Foundation's February 2021 release, which is It's called Race Report, 40 Years of Tackling Racial Inequality in Britain, which essentially is covering exactly the same ground as the Sewell report, but doing it much more methodically and with much more scientific rigor, addressing education, employment, health, housing, policing, and the criminal justice system and community cohesion. We also have the Runnymede Trust, which has produced a series of reports over the last few years about the wage gap, the income gap, the different outcomes in terms of health and education. The British Medical Journal has produced its own account of differential racialized health outcomes. So there's already a vast amount of information in the public domain. The existence of this report is essentially an attempt to deny this stuff exists out there already. And I think that the most important thing is not, in fact, to generate another report, which actually I think is, but just simply to work with the resources which already exist, but to deploy them for particular political purposes around issues like discussion of differential educational outcomes, and that's a matter of interest to some of our members who are teachers and who are involved in education. There's a conversation which has to be held within the community of lawyers and people who are involved with the judiciary. There's a particular conversation to be had within the church, and the resources are there for all of this. And obviously we could seek to bring this together in some way, but I think there's some risk of attempting to remake the wheel. And I think that there already are very important and powerful resources out there, which we just simply have to bring together and to mobilize. So, I mean, I'd be very happy to see where we take this forward as within the Barbadian community within Britain, but in a way which also seeks to reach out to other groups of people and builds this essentially as a response to the politics of the present and of the year or two to come. So what is our position on Kill the Bill? What is our position on the government's response to COVID and the third wave, which is about to hit us? What is our response to the underpayment of workers in the NHS who tend overwhelmingly to be or disproportionately to be Black, Asian, minority, ethnic? These are issues of contemporary politics that should be addressed. So we should not be sucked into simply addressing their report. It's in fact the substantive political issues and policy issues which this report seeks to commandeer our attention in a particular direction about, which in a sense have to be confronted.
Richard, I agree with you, and I don't think it is about producing another report. I think, we all know how, well, some of us may know how to do a lit review, for example. So reviewing the current information that's out there to counter what they're saying, to demonstrate, you know, the points that they've made as being inaccurate, and producing the evidence within their own reporting that highlights that. So I don't think for 1 minute it's about, you know, reproducing a report to counter their report. I think that would actually be counterproductive. I think it will be more productive to do a review of the information that they have out there. Yes, we have, you know, you mentioned about the Runnymede and all the other links. That's great, but we need to do something for us. And if we're looking at what they have already produced, and finding the issues within their own reporting, which cause, you know, raise a question of accuracy or validity, then I think that's what we need to do. Because if we're confronting them with their shortcomings, then they're going to be forced to stand up and readdress it, you know, rather than, you know, shove it under the carpet again and say, well, you know, we've all got a chip on our shoulder, so to speak. So I think it's about reviewing what's out there to basically counter what they're saying. We don't have confidence in what they're reporting, or how they're reporting, how they compile the information. And I think, you know, looking at all the other reports and looking at how the inaccuracies within that stand out, I think would be a better way to go. But one thing I think is not agreeable is to take no action at all.
Okay, wonderful, thank you. And Esther, I wanted to come to you on the question that we had about the terminology for white privilege. Do you have any thoughts on that, given your work in terms of repatriations? I'd love to hear your view.
Okay, thank you. Reparations to repair. My thoughts are, I don't see why we need to change the terminology. Throughout this discussion, I've been listening, and one of the problems that I feel we have is that we're constantly reacting to agendas and frameworks and foundations that have been set by other people. And in that regard, I'm reminded of the comments by Toni Morrison, who famously described racism as a distraction, not because she was saying that it's not real and it doesn't harm us, but because she was saying that the function of it is to distract us from doing the work that we have to do to build communities. So ultimately, terminology is anyone can define anyone, but it's about who has the power to make those definitions stick. And what we must do is resist attempts to constantly redefine the foundation upon which not only we are standing, but which generations before us have also built. And that is about building our own, building our power. But then the question I have, because even though I'm Bajan heritage and also Guyanese heritage, I'm part of the wider African diaspora, work in a pan-Caribbean way, pan-African way, Black internationalist way. And these same conversations are happening. And one of the things that I see amongst all of us is that we actually underestimate that power potential of us uniting across these narrow ethnicities that we carry, okay, or the passports that we have. And that is how we consistently are divided and ruled. So the question is, do we want to remain big fishes in small ponds, or do we want to join that sea of dissent and also the alternative community building, which is part of our repair that our people are engaged in? And I think when we can see the bigger picture as those that are actually trying to deny us from identifying whiteness, white privilege, white supremacy, are a minority, a global minority on planet Earth, but yet have been able to colonize 3/4 of planet Earth. So it's about time that we learned to actually take a leaf out of their book in terms of the positive aspects of our own unification. And we don't have to learn from them. Our movements that have been against racism have always recognized that we are stronger together. So it has to, in my view, extend, even though we may have specificities within our specific communities, we have to do border crossing, because we are a global people and our families are global. We have families all over the world. So those are my comments around this question. So let us build on all of that work that has gone before and not see ourselves as some special group because that is what is keeping us disempowered, and therefore we lack that power to effectively challenge the power that is being deployed against us, that separates us and divides us.
Thank you for that. And in terms of Adrian, we haven't heard from you for a little while, so is there anything you wanted to contribute about the things that have been raised thus far before we start to bring it to a close?
I'd like to say that what Esther said was very powerful and absolutely brilliant. I agree with the reference that there has been actually responses to the report already. So the Runnymede responded, and also I saw a show where Simon Woolley responded. So the responses are there, but it is around people coming together and having a real kind of coming together and making a real concerted response together. And that response, there has to be a real strategy around that. So we have to think strategically and operationally around that, because ultimately we're having to confront the machine, which has existed for, like I said, we can go back to the first report, go back forward 20 years. 20 years from now, we could face the same thing. So it's about essentially taking down the machine, and that takes a real strategic effort as opposed to just putting a statement out there.
Wonderful, thank you. And in terms of starting to wrap up, and final words will be with Tyrone Roach, with each of our panel members, and I'm going to cycle back in terms of the order in which we started. So it'll be Esther, Jocelyn, Angela, Yvonne, Adrian, and Richard. I'm just going to ask you for a very short 1 or 2 sentence closing statement in terms of things you would like to leave the audience with, and maybe how we open up the narrative for our next conversation, because clearly there needs to be a next conversation, because there's just so much that we haven't had a chance to get through in terms of the written comments and the people who wanted to share. So Esther, final words in closing from you for this evening.
So I guess my closing comment would be that we cannot have racial justice, racial equity, without recognizing our right to repair, or our right to a remedy and reparation. So repair is really what we're talking about. And what we do to repair is that we begin with the self-repair, because it's already been said, all these reports, there is a lack of political will to implement the reports. But guess what? We are the majority. We are the global majority, even though we may be located in specific places. So when we close our ranks, when we pull together our skills, our resources, our resilience, that example in itself means that we will have the power to enforce our rights in terms of the state and how we are denied access to our human rights and our collective rights. So let us remember that we are human, and therefore we have to exercise our rights as collectives. And we can best do that by organizing in our localities, organizing in our professional groups, our community groups, our faith groups, whatever groups, our fraternities. Let us be doing that, but let us continue that work of building community, because it is that community that will protect us and defend us and stand up for us when our rights are violated. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Esther. Jocelyn, from you, closing remarks?
Just basically that, on the back of what Esther's saying, that we have to all come together. It can't be individual, just like the report has fragmented us. We can't work like that. We have to all come together. Much more needs to be put in looking at the mental health and well-being of our children, especially then first of us, so that we can continue to build and be much stronger. And we have to keep lobbying. Oh, my internet's gone. No. Oh, no, okay, message came up. We have to keep lobbying our local MPs. Like in Birmingham, for example, we've got a local mayor's election coming up the 6th of May. You've got to lobby those people. You can't want our vote and you're not speaking to them. You have to use your voice, use whatever platform is there out there for us. to move forward, and we do need to come forward with this.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Angela, final word for you.
Just to say thank you everybody for allowing me to talk. I just really quickly want to say that everything that Esther and Jocelyn I agree with in terms of getting together. We need to let the powers that be understand that there are different voices. We don't often get heard enough. I'm talking about Barbadians in the Barbadian community in the UK. We do not get heard enough. It's important for us to actually stamp, make our own stamp and make the powers that be understand that we have our own views and our own feelings on things like this. I'm very keen that we take a positive action, proactive action, and that we do more to get involved in shaping reports like this rather than being told what our experience is at the end. Okay, so thank you so much, everybody.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Angela. Yvonne?
Okay, good evening again. So my final thoughts would be for this, and this goes to everyone here. Yes, we need to change the narratives. We need to claim back language and not be afraid to do that. We need to resist labels and be recognized for who we are. And I think until we as a people begin to acknowledge that we're not labels, then I think, psychologically we're going to be stunted. And so I think that we need to do that. I think that I agree with Angela, I agree with Esther and Jocelyn. I mean, our thoughts are the same, that, this is just the beginning of our responding. And I think that we need to be responding in a proactive way and get away from the talking and start with some action. So I would implore everybody this evening to think firstly about the language that's being used, about you, about your family, about your neighbours, etc. Our folks used to say it takes a village to raise a child. We're the adult children and we are the village. So we need to raise the village as we see fit. That's going to benefit our children in the future. So for me, everybody, it's future forward. And thank you for the time tonight.
Wonderful, thank you. Adrian, over to you for your final thoughts.
Yeah, I'd like to, sorry, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'd like to say on the back of what everyone on the panel says so far, I know Esther made the reference about repairing and coming together. I think one thing we have to remember is that, we are actually stronger. The language that sometimes that we use can destabilize us. Ultimately, when I think about my grandparents, when they came here in the 1950s, and the strength that they had and the strength that they showed when they came here and the strength they had to show throughout their lives in the UK, we have to remind ourselves of what people before us went through and how strong they are and how strong we are. So the language you have to use has to be more around strength and around not to forget what people have done and sacrificed for us to be where we are today, and that how are we going to build on that, because we are stronger than what we're being told that we are. And we need to know that.
Wonderful, thank you. And Richard, over to you. So, Richard, I'm just...
You need to unmute, Rich.
I wanted to start just very quickly with just some facts. How many Black, Asian or minority ethnic members of the royal family are there? High court judges, CEOs of FTSE 100 companies, professors of Oxford and Cambridge, managers of football teams. Wanted to go through a long list of criteria which provide us with very clear indicators of the reality of British society, of who is represented in terms of the control of the major institutions of this society. Now, there are many exceptions to this which this report seeks to bring out. But what that report suppresses, to take up the point raised by the last speaker, is the ways in which the successes which have been achieved by people of Caribbean and African backgrounds in Britain over the last 30 or 40 years were not given to them. They were the product of struggle, which began in the 1960s and 70s, and which made possible and which made necessary the forms of recognition by white British society that there was a problem. If Stephen Lawrence's mother had not refused to allow her son's life to be wasted in that way, we would not have had Macpherson deciding that there was such a thing as institutional racism. If indeed people within every institution in this country who came from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds had not challenged the racism within these institutions, you'd have had none of this progress, which the report wants to make much of, which is an incremental progress. And that seems to me to end really is the lesson for the future, is that there needs to be an absolutely uncompromising attitude to injustice, both which we face as individuals and which we can see as the experience of people in the organizations of which we're a part. And if it's one thing we've learned over the last 40, 50 years in Britain is that struggle yields results, even if some people may come along and try and deny the existence of that struggle. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you all for the comments, of which there are 19 pages. So I'm going to send those comments to Tyrone. I will see what he makes of them in terms of coming up with maybe the topic for the next event, whether that be a continuation of this conversation or an offshoot of some of the wonderful things you've been sharing in the chat. So thank you to our wonderful panelists for your brilliant, as always, contributions. Thank you to Tyrone for pulling this event together, and thank you for everyone who has joined us from around the world taking part, and for those who had the opportunity to share, we very much appreciate your contributions, and for those we haven't yet heard from, I look forward to hearing from you next time. So Tyrone, I will hand the floor back to you.
Okay, good evening. Thanks everyone. Thanks to all of my panelist friends who I have persuaded and cajoled to become a part of this at a very short notice. Our intention as the National Council was to analyze this report and produce a statement based on the report and representing the Barbadian community. I think that was our initial intention. But after tonight, I think we need, like you said, to think about it further and take it to the next level. So I think initially we as a group will produce a response to the report based on what was said tonight as an oracle from the Barbadian community, and also think about the next step in this journey, because like everyone has said, and I do agree with you, that we need to organize and make our voice heard. Furthermore, and just to remind you, in case Marilyn has forgotten, that on Wednesday the 28th, we're having a discussion regarding domestic violence against women, and it's on the 28th of April on a Wednesday night. So thank you all, and thank you, Marilyn, for doing a sterling and a very challenging job tonight. And your payment will be in the post as usual. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Tyrone.
Marilyn?
Everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you, Marilyn.